Okay, so now it's finally time to start displaying our latest news into our screen. You can see that this is our main.dart file and it simply displays text. The latest news will be displayed here. You can see the preview in the iPhone 11 Pro Max simulator on the right hand side, which doesn't really display anything. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder and I will call it Pages. And now I can go ahead and add a new file. I will call it newslist.dart, which is going to be representing a list of news so we can actually display those list articles. So I'm going to go ahead and create a news list, which is going to extend a state list widget. We can change it to stateful if we need to. Right now we don't. And then it will have a build function. The first thing we need is access to the news article list view model, which is going to be responsible for fetching the data. And now we can actually go ahead and say news list, which is a constructor. So news list, and inside the news list, we can actually go ahead and call news article list view model dot populate top headlines. So whenever this particular widget or page is actually created, then we will go ahead and call news article list view model dot populate headlines. Great, this is perfect. Now the question is that in our main.dart file, what are we doing? We are creating our app bar, which is the top bar that you can see. We are also putting the body, and the body is currently representing some sort of a text control. We can actually move all of these things out and say that our home will be the news list. This means that we can remove most of this stuff. So let's go ahead and start moving all of this stuff, and we will move it to the news list. So now I can say news list. Make sure that we add a reference to the news list. Perfect. The news list doesn't really have any build function, or even if it has, it doesn't really return anything. It returns null. So now let's go to our pages, news list. You can see that our widget is currently returning nothing. We are currently inside the material app. The only thing that we need to implement is the scaffolding and all the different stuff. So we can actually go ahead and say scaffolding or scaffold, and we can check out the app bar. So we can set the app bar, and we can set title of the app bar, which is latest or even like top news, I guess. And for body, currently we can simply say text hello world. Let's go ahead and save it. And now we're back to the same situation that we have text and we have the app bar, but right now we're inside the news list. Now, whenever we create an instance of the news list, it's going to call the populate top headlines. And if all of that stuff is working correctly, making a web service call, getting back access to the classes or models, and then mapping to the view models, then we should be able to access it. But the question is, how do we access it? How can we get access to our articles? If you remember that in the news article list view model, we extended the change notifier, and finally on line number 15, we call notify listeners. Whenever we are calling notify listeners, the view can listen to these changes and get access to the news article list view model and all the public properties. But in order to do that, we have to use a package called provider. So let's go ahead and first go ahead and add that package. And once we add that package, we should be able to use it. So I'm going to simply jump into pubspec.yaml file, and right beneath the HTTP, I'm going to add the provider package. And let's go ahead and save it. When we save it, it's going to download the package, or you can simply say flutter packages get on the terminal, and it should do the same thing. So now the provider package has been installed correctly. Now I need to tell the provider package who will be responsible or who will be able to get those changes. Right now, our application is quite small, so we can actually make use of something called the run app function, and we can simply pass in the package right over here. This is going to make it so that every child inside the app will be able to access the package. You can even wrap it up over here if you want to. That's perfectly fine too. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to call it change notifier provider. This is contained in the provider package. And in this, I'm going to go ahead and set a couple of different things. First, I'm going to set the builder. I'm going to get access to the context, and it is going to return me a news article list view model. And the second thing is the actual child. For the child, I'm going to simply go ahead and return news list, just like before. Nothing changed over here. This means that news list will be able to get changes from the change notifier in terms of news article list view model. So this is the instance the news list is going to receive. And now we can go into news list and use that instance. So right over here in my build function, I can actually go over here and I can say maybe VM for view model, and I can say provider dot off. Let's go ahead and first make sure that we import provider package dot off, and we can pass in the news article list view model and passing in the context. So this is going to give us the view model, the news article list view model, which we can go ahead and use it now. So every single time the news article list view model is calling populate top headlines, it's going to fetch all the data, and then on line number 15 it's going to fire notify listeners, which in turn is going to call the build function and going to give us the access to the change news article list view model object, which will contain the updated articles because we have set the articles on line number 14. Super cool, right? Okay, so now let's go back over here. We don't really want the text control to be displayed over here. Obviously, we want the list control. So I'm going to go ahead and say list view dot builder, and list view dot builder is going to take in a couple of different arguments. It's going to say items count. So in this case, we can say vm dot articles dot length, perfect, and then the item builder, which is going to give us the context and also the index. We can go ahead and return any control that we want, but usually if you're using a list view control, you can use a list tile, and you can provide some control like a title control, which will be a text. So in this case, we can actually go ahead and say vm.articles at the particular index dot title. This is a view model that is being returned. Let's go ahead and save it and do a hard restart on it by pressing the refresh button. And we'll see that if this is getting our changes or it is not getting our changes to be on the screen. Make sure that all your code is correct. Let's go ahead and save it. Put a hard restart. And now we'll see that if it gets populated or not. You can see that currently it is not populating. Something is not right. Something is not happening. So we need to now debug as to what is exactly going on. So the problem that we're facing is that it is not firing the build function again, even though the notify listeners is getting called. Now the way to resolve this problem is to actually go into news article list view model, create a constructor, and make your populate top headlines function private. Now you don't really have to make it private, but now we don't really need it anymore to be public. So we can actually go ahead and call this function privately. There we go. So that nobody from outside can actually call this function. And the only time populate top headlines is called is when you create a new instance of news article list view model. Now can go ahead and we can remove all of the occurrences of news article list view model. There we go. Now if I go ahead and refresh it, you should be able to see that we will be able to fetch all the news. So why did it work and why didn't it work previously? And the reason why it didn't work previously is that in our main.dart file, this is the instance that we are returning, so which is the news article list view model. And in the news article list view model, we are firing populate top headlines, which is eventually going to change the article's property and fire notify listeners. Since this is the thing that we are going to be passing to the news list and all the child control of news list, we need to do that in the news article list view model constructor. And now you can see that it is displaying everything. Now let's go ahead and also display the leading, which in this case will be an image dot network, and we can actually say VM, which is the view model dot articles, and we can get index dot image URL. Let's go ahead and save it. And now you can see that the images are also being displayed. Great. So all of this is working as planned, as expected. And now we have the title being displayed. Not only that we have the title being displayed, but we also have the images being displayed also. One of the things that you immediately notice is the size of these different images. Some images are small and some images are large. We can actually fix that issue really easily by wrapping all of this stuff inside a container. So I'm going to go to my image and I can say refactor, and I'm going to wrap it around with a container. Now the container is going to allow us to set some sort of a width to that particular container and also the height of the container, which we're going to say 100 by 100. And now you can see the images are much nicer and all aligned. Now, one other issue that you will face when you're dealing with images is that sometimes, which is not the case right now, but sometimes you will see that the image is just not there. So what should we do in those situations? Should we just leave an empty block over here with nothing being displayed? I think the better idea would be to simply display some sort of a placeholder image. So let's go ahead and see that how we can do that. The first thing we need is some sort of a placeholder image, meaning some sort of a dummy image that we can display over here once the image is actually null. Now I already have that image and I can simply drag that image into our folder. I'm going to go to my lib folder, actually above the lib folder, and going to create a parent directory called images. The images will have all of the images that I can actually use. So in this case, I have a news placeholder image, which I should be able to simply drag and drop. So let me go ahead and drag and drop our news placeholder image, but you can use any image that you actually want. So I can actually go to my images folder and go and get the news images and then simply drag it and drop it into news or images folder. So this news placeholder image will be displayed whenever we don't have an actual image of the news, which is quite possible. Right now, all the images are there, which is pretty good, but it's not always the case. Now the question is, how do we access this particular image? In order to access this image as an asset, we're going to go to our pubspec.yaml file, and you're going to simply go to line number 45 or 46, and you're going to see assets. Over here, we can actually define our assets. Now, images, in this case, we're going to go ahead and say not this image, but we have a separate image, which is called news placeholder.png. Perfect. So this will be our image. Let's go ahead and see that if it is able to find that image or not. We're going to do a hard reset to see that if, or a restart to see if we can find that image or not. Let's go ahead and clear this up. There we go. So we have some issues going on over here. So let's go ahead and arrange them correctly. All right. I'm not sure why this is being displayed. Let's go ahead and run it again. Okay, so that error is gone. So make sure that the YAML file does take into account the indentation. So make sure that these all are indented correctly. And now we can actually go ahead and use the news placeholder image, which is in your images folder. So I can go ahead and jump into the news list page, and you can see over here that we are currently using the network image only, but network image is not always available, so we can actually do something about this. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and I'm going to say that if the vm.articles of index.image URL. Now, that's a pretty long thing to write again and again, so maybe we can simplify this. Maybe I can go over here and say, create a variable called article, and I can say, in this case, vm.articles, and give me the article at that particular index. And now instead of using vm.articles.blah blah blah, I can simply go ahead and use the article variable. So article.title, and I can use something over here also, which means I can say over here article.image URL. If it is equals to null, then we can go ahead and use image.asset, and we can point to the image that we have, which in this case is news placeholder.png. Otherwise, we are okay to go ahead and fetch the image from article.image URL. Perfect. So this is going to make sure that we have the image, some sort of an image being displayed if we have everything working correctly. Now you can see that there is some issue going on. I have to make sure that this is working out correctly. There we go. We were missing just a brace over here. And let's do a hard reset or restart on this. Currently, all the images are there, so you don't really see our news placeholder image being displayed. But if a situation comes and the news image is actually null, then you will see the images placeholder being displayed. So if I go back to my news article, and after the images, we get the images over here, I can say this dot articles of, let's say, number 4 dot image URL equals to null. All right. So let's see what's going on over here. It says it doesn't really have a setter. Well, that's because we are actually passing in the article. Maybe we can actually even pass it around over there in the actual article. So let's go over here. And for this, we can actually return, let's see if we can return null. And there we go, just for checking it out. So if the image URL is actually null, we will automatically display the news placeholder image. Great. Let's go back to our URL to image. And there you have it. We have just displayed all the top news in our application, and this will work not only for iOS, but also for Android devices. Now, the next step would be to start searching for specific keywords. If I wanted to news about Houston or let's say basketball or something else, I should be able to do that. So that is in the next section where we're going to learn how to add a search bar and how to perform a search using our news API. So stay tuned for that. So this is not really the continuation of this section. We have completed the section in the earlier lecture, and everything has worked, as you can see. But I also want to show you a different way of using the change notifier. In our correct implementation, if you look at the news article list view model, you'll see that we actually called the populate top headlines from right inside the constructor, the initializer, for the news article list view model. Now this is fine and it works perfectly fine, but sometimes it's really not a good idea to call this inside a constructor. I want to explicitly call the populate top headlines function. So how can I do that? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove it from right over here. So now I can't really call that particular constructor. And I will make this a public function, meaning populate top headlines can be called outside of news article list view model. Now if I go back to my news list, you can see that I have a build function over here where I call this. Well, I can actually call any function in my news article list view model if I go ahead and create some sort of a constructor for the news list, and I can do those things. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and say news list, and I can say provider. Now, one of the things you will notice over here is that the provider, although I can pass in the news list article view model, I do need access to the context, which I don't have right now. In order to get the context, I need to make sure that I am using the state. So I'm going to change this into a news list state, which is going to be extending the state for our news list state widget, which we don't have. So let's go ahead and create that. The only thing we're doing is that we're adding a state to it. And this will extend the state full widget this time, so this one. And now we can go ahead and implement or override our function. So let's go ahead and say override. And the only function I have to override is called the create state. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and say over here create state. And if you call that function, it is going to return you the underscore news list state. Perfect. So now I can go into my underscore news list state and implement the init state function. And inside my init state function, I will have access to the context. So I can go over here and say provider.auth news article list view model, passing in the context, which is simply context. Now I have access to it. And I can also go ahead and call one of the functions, which in this case is populate top headlines, because I want the headlines to be populated as soon as the page is loaded. Now this is not really going to work because you do need to pass in one more thing, which is listen, and we will say false, which is basically saying that I don't want you to keep track of the changes that I'm doing at this level, because this is only to fire it once and forget about it. Now let's go ahead and refresh it. And you will see that when I refresh it, it's going to produce the same exact result. So in this particular way, or a second way that you can see, we have allowed ourselves to explicitly call populate top headlines. Let me actually go ahead and also make sure that we are doing this over here. So I'm going to go over here, and this is complaining that the news list isn't defined now. So let's go ahead and first, actually this should be called news list and not news list state. So that's my mistake. So this will be news list. Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and refresh it now. And there we go, it still works. Great, right? So this is just another way of doing things, and if I had to do it, I would choose this way, because over here we are explicitly calling the populate top headlines function, and we're only calling it once, and we're not really tracking any changes, but that's why we're calling it listen false, meaning that just call it once and be done with it. But anytime else the news article list view model is going to fire notify listeners, we are going to get a copy of the news article list view model right on line number 24 with the latest changes or whatever changes that you're making. And then we can go ahead and create our user interface. So if you have to use the approach, I would most probably go with this approach, because over here I'm explicitly calling the populate top headlines. And this approach also allows you to completely remove the news article list view model initializer or constructor, because now we have a function populate top headlines that we can use. So this was just a different way, another way of doing the same thing. If you want to learn how to create amazing Flutter applications using MVVM design pattern, then check out my course Flutter and Dart Build Apps using MVVM design pattern. This is a 9+ hour course, and it's going to start by explaining to you what exactly is MVVM design pattern, and immediately going to jump into some amazing projects like the News app, that where you will fetch the information from a JSON API, the Pathfinder application, which is going to integrate with Google Maps and Google Places to let you know of good restaurants near you. Then the City Care application, in which you can take pictures and you can even upload pictures to your custom server. And finally, we're going to jump into Hacker News application, where you will integrate with the Hacker News public API and display all the Hacker News along with their comments. I even added the source code for some of the clone apps that we will be doing: the Apple Stocks app, the Apple Weather app, the Apple News app, and the Apple App Store app. This is an amazing course, and this is a little bit of an intermediate to an advanced course. So if you are a complete beginner, I don't really recommend this course for you. There are other courses out there, but if you have already passed that beginner stage, this is the next step for you. Now, the best way to get this course is check out the YouTube description, and you will find the link to the Flutter and Dart course. Click on the link and get the course. You will get the best price, and to be really honest, I'll get to keep a little bit of a higher revenue if you use my links. So thank you so much, and I can't wait for you to join this course.